Okay. So we're all ready to start. We'll start as usual with talking about the Torah portion of the upcoming week. Those of you who came in a little later, you missed an interesting discussion about this week's past Torah portion. Maybe I should start asking you to tell me what the rabbi spoke about in the synagogue that you went to see whether or not you pay any attention or you fall asleep. I don't know. Anyway, at the end of last week's Torah portion, we have the famous story of the binding of Isaac. And indeed, the rabbis of the Talmud sometimes assumed that the chronology of the stories well, let me put it this way. We read about the binding of Isaac last week. We read about the death of Sarah at the very beginning of this week's Torah portion. So is there a time space between those two stories? Right? Rashi famously, because there's a discussion, how old is Isaac? How old is Isaac at the time of Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac? We know how old Sarah was when Isaac is born. She's 90 years old. Abraham's 100, according to the Torah. We know she dies at the age of 127, okay, according to the biblical chronology. That being so now, Ibn Ezra, one of the Spanish exegetes, one of the Spanish commentaries, says Isaac had to be old enough that he could carry that load of, I'm not sure it's going to fly. That load of wood on his back. So he assumes he's, 13, 14, maybe 15 years of age. Rashi, the most famous of the biblical commentators, suggests the story of the binding of Isaac happens just before the death of Sarah. Sarah's never informed of what's going to take place. It says, V'yashkom Abraham baboka. Abraham gets up early in the morning, saddles his donkey, and goes off. There's no mention of any connection with Sarah. And so Rashi suggests that she hears about it after the fact, not knowing what exactly happened, and she dies as a result of shock over the story of the binding of Isaac. So if that is accurate, that makes Isaac 37 years of age. Okay. And furthermore, we read not long after the account of Sarah and her death and Abraham's purchase of the burial cave in Kever Machpelah, which is in the city of Hebron, which was the first piece of property actually purchased by part of the Jewish people, ancestor of the Jewish people. Abraham needs a wife for Isaac. He sends a servant off, and what we're told is he gets married at 40 years of age. Okay, so that gives us this kind of a time frame. So according to Rashi, since he wants to say the death of Sarah takes place right after the binding of Isaac, Isaac's 37. She dies almost immediately after that story. By 3 years later, he gets married to Rivka. Now, to make problems for that chronology, we're told right after the story of the binding of Isaac about different family members who were born, including Rivka. Well, that means if Rivka was born at that time, she's 3 years old when she gets married to Isaac, which is a little young, to say the least. But in the ancient world, people did get married, not necessarily have any obvious relations, but they did get married. We have all kinds of stories about kings and their princes and sons and daughters and getting married at very tender ages, even before they're really old enough to be married. But I'm not sure I'm prepared to accept that because of all the other stories that go on with Rebecca. All right, beginning back. So Abraham sees that Isaac needs a wife. He sends his servant. His servant is never named, but you'll ask anybody, they'll tell you it was Eliezer, because the only servant of Abraham who's ever mentioned by name is Eliezer. So everybody assumes it had to be Eliezer. He goes and he comes to a well outside of town. And he says, God, let the one who comes and draws water for me and for the animals and all of that, that should be the woman who'd be the wife for Isaac. And sure enough, that's what happens. So it's interesting that Isaac's wife results from a meeting between Abraham's servant and Rebekah at the well. When Jacob, Isaac's second son, goes back to Padan Aram after the story with Esau, that's a few weeks from now, he meets Rachel at the well. Then when Moses is on his way out of Egypt, he comes to a well or a cistern, and he ends up meeting the daughters of Yitro, one of them being Zipporah, whom he eventually marries. So it's very clear that in those days, the well was the singles bar of the time. So if you wanted a spouse, you went to the local well. Right? In any case, so Rebecca draws water. She gives it to the servant. She waters the camels, and camels drink a lot of water. So he takes him to her house, and make the long story short, they may arrange for a marriage between Rebecca, Rivka, and Yitzchak, Isaac. And then so Rivka goes back with the servant and marries Isaac. And eventually we're told about their children. That's for next week. Right?
Recording in progress.
Sorry.
What was that?
I have no idea.
Okay, you're on two forms. You're on phone and computer, and I see doing interference. Put yourself on.
I'm done. I got it.
Okay.
I got it. Sorry.
You may want to silence yourself. Put yourself on mute.
Yeah.
Okay. Rivka shows this spirit of giving, of caring. And so that's said to be a suitable replacement for Sarah, because Sarah was with Abraham and bringing guests and taking everybody into their household like that. So it's very clearly, it spells out that she comforts Isaac for the loss of his mother, Sarah. But also what I wanted to say was that Isaac as a figure is a very, we have three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We have lots about Abraham, we have lots about Jacob, but really very little about Isaac. Yitzchak is just mostly there as a bridge generation between Abraham and Yaakov. But he has a couple of adventures, but otherwise he's sort of a non-character to speak of in many ways. Okay. And one of the, we're told in the account of when Rivka is about to meet him, he's out walking around in the field, and the rabbis interpret that meaning he was praying the afternoon service. So he is credited by Jewish tradition as being the one who set up what we should daven in the afternoons. While Abraham gets credit for the shacharit, the morning service, and Jacob gets the evening service. Okay. So that is that. All right. So tonight we continue with our Hebrew. Where did we had the Lamed last week, right? We had the Vav with the O. Did we do page 16? No. Okay. Tonight we start on page 16. All right. Now, There is a vowel sound that is in many languages, an O sound. Okay. And it's represented in the Hebrew in two forms. And really it's one, but we see it written down as two. It can be a single dot on top of a letter on the left side of the letter, or it can be a dot above what is called the letter Vav. And in this case, the whole thing is serving as a long vowel. Both of them are O, and both of them are treated as vowels in this sense. Okay, we'll come back to the letter Vav a little bit later on. Okay, because it has a consonant. So everybody got it? The O, Cholam. All right. So line number 1. Okay, we got it. So we read bo, o, to, ho, hu, oo. Okay. Line number, all right, so if it's in the middle, it's like you got punched in the middle. Ooh. Right, you know, if you get somebody punches you in the middle of your stomach, you're going to go out there. That's what we're remembering. All right. Line number 2. Bo, o, lo, to, ho, lo, lu. Okay. Line number 3. Roll, tor, bor, bow, root. Line 4. Or, bechor, borat, Torah. So the last word on that line is what? Torah. That's the correct pronunciation, is Torah. You often hear it pronounced as Torah. That's under the Yiddish influence of moving the accent in a little bit. In certain parts of Europe, the O gets an oi sound to it. So it becomes not Torah and not Torah, but Toira. Then oi, Toira. It's Yiddish, but it's also Hebrew that has been highly, but it's Hebrew. There's depending upon what area in Europe the people came from, there were variations in pronunciation, just like in every country. You know, you go in every country, you go in this part of the country, they pronounce things a little bit differently from that part. You know, you can tell somebody's from Scotland versus from Liverpool or from London. If you go to the United States, you can go down south and you hear the and y'all got to come back and see us sometime. All right. And then you got Boston accents and all those kinds of things. And there's Canadian pronunciation, all these things. So it's not a question of right or wrong. It's just local dialects. We're going to use O, though. And that's the way Israelis would pronounce it, as a pure O. Okay. Line number 5. Torot, orot, Yubal, Bubot, Elul. Okay. Line number 6. Your boat, Horaot, Yaltut, Orlot, Ella. Okay. Line number 7. Bechorot, Lot, Bul, Roeh. Right. Line number 8. Aroch, Arucha, La Aroch, Erbul, Berech. Now remember, the accent is going to shift because there are 2 segals there. Berech. Right? And going back up to line 7, Bechorot, right? So the shva there's got to be pronounced. On the other hand, on line 6, the first word is your boat, as your boat on the ocean, right? Okay. Because the one dot, the dot as the vowel there is a short vowel. So you have to have a consonant following associated with that vowel as well. Okay. A lot, some of them are real words now. Orech is length. Buba is a teddy bear, if I recall correctly.
It's doll.
A doll, right. All right. Bechor is the firstborn. Torah, what does Torah mean? That's, I will accept that as part of Torah. Torah essentially means teaching. Really means the basic root of Torah is teaching. So you have Torah, the 5 books of Moses. 5 books of Moses has stories in them. It has mitzvot, commandments. It's teaching. It's doctrine. So Torah has a very wide meaning. It's as a Torah scroll, 5 books of Moses, Jewish tradition. Especially if you're learning Torah, you'll hear that expression, you're studying Torah. That can mean anything in Jewish tradition. It can be Talmud, it can be the Torah itself, it can be the prophets, it could be something in the writings. All of that is Torah. And especially in those communities where you're learning Torah. All right. Okay, now let's turn over to the next page. The Tzeirah. Okay, the Tzeirah. Did we have Yud as Yud? Yeah, we had Yud as Y, didn't we? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, now, before, when we learned the letter Yud, we learned it as a consonant. And the consonant sounds like what? What English letter? Y, like the Y, exactly. Why does it do that? Because it does. Okay, it says my 2-year-old grandson, Y. Okay. And just like the letter Y, if it follows a vowel sound, it can get absorbed into that sound. Right? It may influence also the way you pronounce it. Pa, P-A, you know, my old man, my pa, my papa. P-A-Y is pay. Any A-Y becomes an A, all right? That tells you that the A is not long, or it's not short, it's a long vowel, okay, A. So too the letter Yud. If the letter Yud follows the 2 dots that are on the same plane, right? Same line. It's going to be absorbed into that. It's A. So 2 dots, its name in Hebrew of those 2 dots are Tzeirah. All right, it says that on the far right. They have the sound of A. And the example he gives is Aleinu. See, I would say pay. You know, you pay by the day. All right. Okay. When you have the Tzeirah followed by the Yud, that's really a long vowel. That's going to be a long vowel. If there's no Yud following it, it's going to be connecting with the next consonant to make the syllable. You know, don't worry about that so much, okay? So let's look at line number 1. We have Bay, A, Hey, Tay, Yay. Line number 2. Ray, Hey, Hey, Lay, Bay. Line number 3, Tate, Bait, Beito, Leilot, Lecha. Line number 4, Leah, Borer, Yoel, Techela. Line number 5, Yarbe, Rachel, Haloch, Telech, Lech. Line number 6, Ohel, Be'ohel, Le'ohel, Ohelet. By the way, that's not another name for the underworld. Ohel is a tent. All right. Line number 7, Beita, Baita, Below, Orech, Arecha. Okay, so we're working on the word for the name of God, Eloheinu, as God. All right. Let's turn over to page 18. Okay, now we come to the letter Nun, the Hebrew equivalent of the letter N. The names of the word of the letters tell you the sounds of the letters. All right. Nun is written 2 ways. The one on the right, the far right of the letter Nun, is the way it's written at the beginning or in the middle of a word. Yeah. And at the end of the word, it would be the extended line going down. The Nun Sofit, the final Nun.
Why did they do that? Just do one letter.
Well, because it was a way of telling you that's the end of a word. You know, the languages develop and writing develops and how they come about it. Originally, they didn't have spaces between words. Okay. So that serves as a way of identifying the end of a word. Yeah, no, it's true. And we have Latin inscriptions without any separation, any clear separation between words. You know, somebody invented the idea, you know, let's make some space between so we can better understand it. You know, some of these things you can sense a why, but you're still left with the question, so why only these letters and why not other letters? I can't really explain that. All right. I'm sure if you talk to some professor, that they can give you some kind of explanation. Far better than I. Did you have some?
That was good enough.
That was good enough. You know, as they say, the final answer is because. It's like I said, why do we write Hebrew from right to left? Yeah. The same reason we write it from left to right for English. Although I did see a suggestion, by the way, since originally Semitic languages were often inscribed in stone or clay tablets, it was easier to go in that direction. If you were writing in ink, using ink on a papyrus or a parchment or something like that, it was actually easier to go to since most people are right-handed, to go from left to right because you're not as likely to smear the ink. You know, all right. So lefties, you know, that's a problem with lefties. You know, get left out sometimes. All right. Of course, that's a problem. You know what the Latin word for left is, don't you? I have to figure out to get this. Anyway, the Latin word for left. You know what the Latin word for left is? Sinistra, from which we get sinister. You know what? There's a way to deal with this. Latin. I can't remember. I used to know at the beginning of the Aeneas. Pater noster quies in carius santapi, 2 women, 2. Yeah, a little bit of that. Yeah, Pater Noster, Kies and Kairos, our Father who art in heaven. That's the Lord's Prayer. Okay. You got to put up all this Narshka. Otherwise I get bored. Okay, now where was I? All right, there's a famous Bible story that we'll come across later on. One of the Shoftim, one of the judges, is a man by the name of Ehud. And Ehud was left-handed. And so he goes in to see this Canaanite king. And if you want to check make sure someone doesn't have a knife on them, where do? You pat them down on the left side, because most people are right-handed. And that's where they put their sword, they're going to put their knife. Well, he was a lefty, so he had his hidden on his right side. So he got in to see the king, and then he assassinated him. All right. He was a hero, though. He was a good guy, not a bad guy. Yeah. My daughter-in-law is a lefty, and some of my grandchildren are lefties. Okay. Where were we? All right, letter Nun. All right, so it's an N sound, nothing else. Well, the Nun, and the way you know the difference between the Nun and the Chaf is it's very short. The leg is very short. All right? The Chaf is going to be much longer on top and bottom. Yeah. So we have some Chafs on this page. We'll see that. Okay. Line number 1. No, na, ne, ne, nu, no, nun. All right. Line number 2. Ben, ban, loon, hone, no, noon. Line 3. Baron, no, tain, renana, no, tenet, Elohai. Okay. Elohai is my God. Line number 4. Banana. Anybody like a banana? All right. Bananas, that's another story for another day. Okay. Keep going. Ha-benanot lehachein letachnein lehalan. Okay. Line number 5. Habaron tichonen batoren lachen lahen. All right, so you can see that's where you had the chaf and the nun. Actually, both nuns there following the chaf. Line number 6. El, lo, hey, hain, nu. So Eloheinu is a combination of the word Eloah, God, and Shalanu. The new ending in biblical Hebrew, we frequently use I don't know, not compound. Well, I guess they're compound words, but we have endings in Hebrew to give us possessive, ours and such like. You could say it in a longer form, Shalanu. And in modern Hebrew, that's mostly what is used. They don't use that form as much. I would say Ima Shali, not Imi, my mother. All right? That's a change. Somebody, all right? So languages do change and shift a little bit, but you should be able to understand. Okay. We'll do one more letter tonight. The letter Mem, M. And once again, we have 2 forms. Mem at the beginning and middle of a word, and mem at the end of a word. Now, the final mem, notice it's squared off. The final mem looks very much like a square. keep that in mind, because we're going to learn later on the samach, which is an S, which is lots of curves on it. You slide around it, not this one, you have corners. Mem is the equivalent of the letter M in English. Okay. And it acts the same way as the letter M does. We're working on the word melech. What is melech? King. Okay, so now we're going to be able to read the word king. Okay, line number 1. Ma, me, me, my, may, mo, mu. Line number 2. Mem, mame, bam, lame, rem, mu, moom. Line number 3. Mutar, marat, teman, heyman, limain. Line number 4. Lamum, bameh, rubam, yoram, Beirut. Line number 5. Nelech, nelecha, halom, telem, lechem. Line number 6. Milacha, mala'a, terem, teruma, ne'eman. The first word on line 6. Anybody recognize it? Malacha? That's the Shabbos word. Exactly. Very good. For work. Malacha, what we're not allowed to do in Shabbat. We're not allowed, it's not work, but malacha that we're not allowed to do. Malacha. Okay, line number 7. Harmon, Bahai, Rabotai, Ramban, Hana'ah. And so Melech means king or ruler. Melech is a king. Malka is a queen. Mamlecha is a kingdom. Mamlechet, kingdom or government, just like some memshalas in that. In cognate languages, in Arabic, the word for king uses the same consonants, M-L-K. Malik, or Malik, or something along those lines. Okay, so you see this in a number of words in Hebrew, in Arabic, and then in some of the ancient languages that are no longer spoken, Ugaritic and etc. You will find that the same 3 root letters form the words in the different languages. Okay, we will stop there for tonight. Let me make a note. Chapter 19. Okay, everybody, please review. Okay, anybody remember what we're supposed to be talking about tonight? Kashrut. What does kosher mean? Well, kosher means appropriate, proper. If he's an ish kasher, doesn't mean he's a person who was slaughtered in proper. What? Appropriate, right, correct in a certain sense. You'll find that it's entered into English. Something's not kosher. You'll hear that talking about something's wrong. They say it's not kosher. Something not kosher here. It has nothing to do with somebody being Jewish. You'll hear that, just like chutzpah. And sometimes not too many people can get it pronounced correctly, but you'll have chutzpah used. Now, we have to understand that you can look for reasons for mitzvot. And indeed, there's a lot of Jewish literature that talks about ta'amei mitzvot, the rationale, the reasons for mitzvot. But there is also a great deal of debate in Jewish circles about the worthwhileness of looking for the rationale for a mitzvah. One of the famous rationales for mitzvot is that it's for health purposes. And even Maimonides suggests that at least he doesn't reject the idea that it's a mitzvah and God said it's the end of the story in a certain sense. But he's very concerned with rationale for mitzvot, and he sees in mitzvot a health measure. And indeed, you'll hear people say, why don't Jews eat shellfish? Because it wasn't healthy. You could, there are certain diseases that you can get. Pork could, trichinosis was associated with. I'm sorry, I wanted to get things on here, and it's a new phone, and so I haven't figured all the ins and outs of it. Okay. I believe it was the Ramban, Nachmanides, who in discussing the issue of whether or not keeping kosher had anything to do with health, says, look at the Gentiles. They eat all kinds of things that are not kosher. They don't seem any less healthy than Jews. All right? So it's really not explainable that way. After all, what's healthier? Does it make a difference if you eat a horse or you eat a cow? I don't know if there's any difference in terms of health attributes to it. And if we're talking about, Kashrut never talks about eating poisonous items. Right? It never says you can't eat poison. I know elsewhere you're supposed to protect your life, save your life, so obviously you're not supposed to eat poison. But it's a matter of sanctity, of kedusha. We're told that the basic purpose of the kosher laws is to be holy. And Leviticus chapter 19 opens with the words, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, Daber kol adat b'nei Yisrael v'marta alehem, speak to the entire congregation, community of Israel, and say to them, Kedoshim tiyu, you shall be holy. Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elechem, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Now, the word holy can have the meaning of being distinct, separate. And certainly the laws of Kashrut serves to make the Jewish people distinct, different. If you can't eat together, it's hard to socialize together. And that serves as a way of separation. I may have said it before. I remember hearing a rabbi who gave a speech, and he just recently got married. He wasn't such a youngster anymore. He wasn't elderly, but he wasn't a youngster. But he says, why did I marry somebody who's Jewish? He says, I keep kosher. I observe the holidays, the Sabbath. Who else is going to put up with me besides a Jewish woman? All right. So the more you have in common, the more you share, it creates that bond amongst you, whether it be as a couple, or it be as a family, or it be as a community. If you can eat in each other's homes, you can have a communal life. If you can't eat in communal homes, you can't create much of a community. Right? So Kashrut serves as a way of distinguishing the Jewish people, of uniting the Jewish people, and sometimes causing troubles amongst the Jewish people as well. All right. So I read to you the very beginning of Leviticus 19, and Leviticus 19 goes on and has a bunch of different laws about sacrifices, the fact that if you plant a new tree, you have to let it grow for 3 years, and the 4th year the fruit is kadosh and has to be eaten in Jerusalem. And only in the 5th year may you just consume it. You're not allowed to eat blood of any kind, and that most specifically fits into the kashrut laws that we'll get to later. We're not supposed to round off the sides of our heads. You're not supposed to shave this part of your head. I'm just looking at some of the different ones. Honor the aged. Don't do anything wrong in judgment. Don't have false weights and capacity, that sort of thing. Okay. So we have a lot of different items that come together in the idea of kedusha. And kashrut is one of those items that makes us holy. It also serves as a way, as I like to suggest, of making everything that we do a way of drawing closer to God. We as human beings have to eat because all animals have to eat, right? In that we're no different. If you have a dog, you have a pet of some kind, they have to eat. That you may not send them to high school. Some need to go to school. My dogs especially should get better training. But anyway, but they're not people. But they eat and we eat. What is the difference? How we go about that eating. What we choose to eat. Right? We have 2 dogs at home. One is a very picky eater, and the other, as long as she can get into her mouth, she'll eat it. Okay. We're supposed to be picky eaters in the sense that I am going to choose what I eat, not because I do or do not like its taste, but because I choose to eat something because it's kosher, and I choose not to eat something because it's not kosher. The rabbi said, you're not supposed to say, I won't eat that non-kosher food because I don't like it. Rather, you say, yes, I like it. I'd love to eat it, but what can I do? Right? Just before I started keeping kosher, I didn't grow up in a kosher home. Just before I started to keep kosher, I learned to eat lobster. It was delicious. We're going to talk about all of that tonight. Lobster was very tasty. I grew up eating crabs and shrimp. And then I started keeping kosher. End of crabs, end of lobsters, end of shrimp. Mock shrimp maybe, but not the real thing. Okay. So in chapter 20 of Leviticus, he says, I say and said to you, you shall possess their land, for I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has set you apart from other peoples. So shall you set apart the pure beast from the impure bird from the pure. You shall not draw abomination upon yourselves through beast or bird or anything which the ground is alive, which I have set apart for you to treat as impure. You shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and I will set you apart from other peoples to be mine. Okay. So the idea of sanctity, is found in these passages there. So let's start. Kashrut has different aspects to it. We're going to cover some of it tonight, and we'll cover some more of it next week. Kashrut, though, begins first of all with what we may or may not consume from the animal kingdom. The Torah seems to imply that Adam and Eve are supposed to be vegetarians. Only at the time of Noah does it make clear that human beings are allowed to eat animals. There's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian. It's not a necessarily Jewish value. There's nothing wrong with it. And if you're a vegetarian, that's fine. Right? But the Torah, rather than forbidding everything wholesale, generally speaking, seeks to create frameworks for what we do. We eat. We can eat some animals. We can't eat other animals. That is the framework of the discipline of what Kashrut is about. Like I said, when I eat, it's a way of worshiping God because I'm eating kosher. And while I may not always remember it, from time to time, I do think about it. Yes.
Why isn't eating meat and cheese considered not to be kosher?
Well, we'll come to all of that, but very simply, it says you're not supposed to cook a kid in its mother's milk. Why? Maimonides, again, who seeks often to explain that the laws are often as an attempt to move us away from idolatry, claims that that was an idolatrous practice. To dafka, to take a young animal, a kid, a baby goat, that's what a kid is in that sense. Okay? Not one of my little kids who are running around, right? And take milk from its own mother in order to cook it. He claims that was a practice of pagans, at least some pagans. Whether it was or wasn't, we don't know. But there is this idea, milk is that which gives life to the offspring. To take and mix that which gives life to the offspring with the very flesh of that offspring that you're consuming is just doesn't seem right. That's that may not be. The final answer is that's what it says. That's just an attempt. That's an attempt to come up with a rationale. And actually, it doesn't say. It says 3 times in the Torah, "Lo tavashel gedi b'chalev imo," you should not cook a kid in its mother's milk. And the rabbis derive from that we can't have milk and meat together. We can't cook them together. We can't have any benefit from a mixture of them together. Okay, that's not with fowl. We'll talk about fowl a little bit later on. Okay, answer your question.
Yeah, it's just for clarity, it's dairy and meat, or is it specifically cheese?
It's anything that comes from the liquid of a mammal. It's called there, the milk of a mammal. Anything that's made from the milk of a mammal. Right? Well, anything that comes from a kosher animal, we have rules on. If something comes from a non-kosher animal, we can't consume it at all. The only exception to that rule is honey. And even there, it's a little complicated how the bees actually make the honey. Okay. All right, we'll skip to vegetables right away. All vegetation is kosher in and of itself. Now, you got to make sure it's clean. You got to make sure there are no bugs on it, that sort of thing. But the vegetation itself is purely kosher, and you can consume it with anything. All right. That is in Hebrew. Well, I don't. It's really not Hebrew. It's Yiddish. I don't know what the Hebrew word really for parva is. Yeah, it comes from Yiddish. I don't think it. I don't remember if it's actually a Hebrew word or not in its origins. I don't know. I know it's used in Hebrew. That but it's there. Well, there's some words that are used in Hebrew that I get a Hebrew word a day. What was one of the most recent ones? Gorilla. The nice Hebrew word, gorilla. Okay, so machshan or but people talk about their computers too, right? Okay, so we start with vegetables. All vegetation on a normal basis is kosher. If it's processed, then we all enter into a different realm. Right now, we're just talking about a raw vegetable. You go to the grocery store, you buy a raw rutabaga, you buy a raw cabbage, you buy a raw bean, it's all kosher. And the same with fruit. Anything is vegetation. Okay. Only when we talk about living animate creatures, right, do we get into the question of kashrut, really. Okay. So we'll follow the pattern that the Torah uses. The Torah starts about if it walks on land, a land animal, it has to have certain characteristics to be considered kosher. It must have a split hoof, a cloven hoof. You know, if you look at a cow, really what the hoof is are what we believe from evolution. Originally they were fingers, they were toes, and these are the nails of the toes, right? So kosher four-legged animals will have a split hoof. If it doesn't have a split hoof, it's not kosher, no matter what. So, for example, a horse, it doesn't have a split hoof. It's not kosher. The hoof of the camel is not regarded as being a fully cloven hoof, so it's automatically not kosher. Secondly, it must chew its cud. It has to be a grass eater. Chewing cud means that the animal chews the grass because it's eating something that's very high in cellulose, which is very hard to digest. It swallows it, it goes through the beginning of the digestive process. It goes through a couple of stomachs and it comes back up. The animal chews it some more and goes into another stomach to complete the digestive process. Do they have cloven hoofs? A rabbit? No, they don't have hoofs at all. They have feet, they have paws. No rabbits. No rabbits. What? Hoof is hard. What do we? So now I can give you examples that are cattle, cows, cattle, deer, most deer, goats, moose. We haven't talked about that's a different animal. That's a bird. All right. Moose are kosher. American bison are kosher. Pigs are not. They have cloven hoofs, but they don't chew their cud. Rabbits do not have hoofs, nor do they really chew their cud. The Bible talks about them chewing their cud. That's because they sometimes look like they are. They're really eating their droppings. All right? Monkeys, so basically what we think of as cattle, goats, sheep, not monkeys, no hoofs. Well, again, no hoofs, no chewing. These are all right. Now, right now we're just going to talk about the general rules. We're going to get in more detail after I go over the general. Okay. Yeah. So land animals, we've got that basic distinction. If it lives in water animals, right? It must have fins and scales. If it does not have fins and scales, it is not kosher. So all shellfish are not kosher. All right? All those great foods, crab and shrimp and all of those things. If it is a sea mammal, it's not kosher. Well, to start with, again, right now we're just talking about these species, all right? We're talking about the species. So, because we haven't talked about slaughtering cattle and salting and all those other things yet. Right now, we're just going over the broad outline. If it lives in water, it has to have fins and scales, which means it has to be a fish. that has both of those things. And believe me, well, don't let me forget it, but swordfish is a subject of interesting debate.
That's all I remember. I don't know why. The scales fall off or something.
Yeah, well, the adult swordfish doesn't apparently have scales. The young of the swordfish does. The Talmud speaks about a fish that is called dog ispada. Dog ispada, the word ispada seems to mean like a sword. There was a difference of opinion as to the kashrut of swordfish, and there were a lot of Orthodox authorities that felt that swordfish was kosher. But what happened was a very important conservative rabbi by the name of Isaac Klein, who was the rabbi in the synagogue in Buffalo. Where is it? Yeah. An ancient tradition codified by halacha asserts that all fish with scales necessarily have fin. That's not it. Where is it here? Rabbi Chaim ben Yisrael ben Benisti of Turkey, 17th century, penned the first ruling on the fish with the sword, dag ispada. He recorded that Jews eat the fish despite the fact it does not have scales once it has landed, since when it comes out of the water due to its scales while in water, and that moreover a 350-year tradition affirms this fish is kosher. All right, so he says in the 17th century, kosher. Professor Yehuda Felix also identifies it. The heated dispute within Orthodox circles took a new turn in the 1960s when conservative Rabbi Isaac Klein published a sharp response affirming the tradition of permitting swordfish. Rabbi Klein further claimed that he consulted with leading scientists who confirmed that juvenile swordfish possess scales. So what happened was an important conservative rabbi made a very strong statement that swordfish was kosher, and a bunch of Orthodox authorities said, no, if he says it's kosher, we're going to say it's treif. I mean, that's really it. That's really it. So I don't eat swordfish. I would never say there's anything wrong with eating swordfish. I'm just more stringent myself, but believe me, if Isaac Klein says it, you can rely on Isaac Klein. It's a fish with a very long, it looks like it's a pointed beak. It's all right. All right, so there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fish that are kosher. Some of the common fish that are not kosher are eels, catfish, sharks, and like I said, all the sea mammals, porpoises and whales and that sort of thing. Now, there is a fish called a dolphin fish, which is also called mahi-mahi in Hawaii. It's a fish. It's just called a dolphin fish. It's not a dolphin. It's right. It's perfectly fine. So, it's kosher. It's a regular fish. It's just because people hear dolphin fish, they associate it with dolphins and porpoises, and they think it's not kosher. But common kosher fish are trout, walleye, northerns, salmon, tuna. Well, there are certain tunas that are kosher and some that are not. That because it's into certain areas. What? Yeah, but and so it becomes an issue because you got to know what fish is. And you go to a store and you buy a fillet of fish, you can't always be sure that what you're buying is what they claim they're selling. That's been a problem in restaurants. They've written about that, where restaurants will have a fish on the menu and they're substituting a different fish for it because it's more expensive, the fish they have on the menu, and they don't have it. Yes?
What about caviar?
As long as it comes from a kosher fish. No. I don't really know how that's determined, but caviar, well, I assume that roe is harvested from the fish itself. Okay, roe just means the fish eggs. Most caviar, the big standard caviar, come from sturgeon. And while there is a lot of debates in the Middle Ages on the kashrut of sturgeon, sturgeon is generally accepted today as not being a kosher fish, not kosher. Problem with sturgeon, just like sturgeon, apparently, if you take a sturgeon and you boil it, you can remove the scales. But if you don't boil it first, when you try to scale it, it tears the flesh. So to be a kosher fish, you have to be able to scale it without tearing the flesh. Just like a shark, if you try to, it has kind of scales, but you can't scale it without tearing the flesh. Yes.
Is it considered impure if you are falsely led on to believe you're eating kosher? So, for example, in 2013, the UK had a lot of grocery stores had beef, like ready-made burgers.
So there was a big, there's a big scandal many years in the States. In the days of the temple, there was just a discussion on this. Where did I hear this discussion? Oh, at the Morning Minion. I was talking about there was a woman who went on a flight somewhere, and she ordered a kosher meal, and she got her packaged meal, and she's eating it, and she sees some of the other very frum ladies. They get served something different, and she discovered she was eating non-kosher. And so she went to this rabbi, what should she do? And he gave her some things, you should do this, pray and fast a day or something, and you learn something, or he gave a bunch of things, in the days of the temple, when you made a mistake by doing something you're not supposed to do, but it was unintentional, that was one major reason for sacrifices. People brought sacrifices for unintentional acts. If you violate the Shabbat without meaning to, you didn't mean to do it, but you did it, you would bring a sacrifice to the temple. That was how the kapara was understood to take place. Today, you pray, you ask God for forgiveness, you may push yourself to do a little more as a kind of a corrective to do it. I operate under the basic premise, if somebody tells me it's kosher and I eat it and it's not, it's their sin. Right? They're committing the sin. We'll talk about more of that next week when we talk about supervision and things like that. Okay.
Rabbi, quick question for you.
Yes.
Understanding that blood is forbidden per kosher guidelines, where does the preparation of meat come into play? So do you ideally have to cook everything well done?
No. Just basically, just answer real quickly, and we'll go over it more later because I'm still talking about the general rules.
Okay, yeah.
You have to slaughter the animal in a way that the blood will drain out. And the meat is salted normally to draw any extra meat, any extra blood out, and that's all you have to do. You can cook it however you want. As minimal as possible. By cutting the carotid artery, it cuts off the blood flow to the brain, and that's considered to be, that's one of the big arguments in the modern era. Okay, all right, so again, if it lives in water and it's a living being, an animal, fins and scales, those are the principal qualifications. If it is fowl, chickens, goats, geese, birds of all kinds, there we run into an interesting problem. The Torah essentially says all birds except for are kosher. When then it lists a bunch of birds that are not kosher. Okay, so theoretically, if the bird is not on that list, it's kosher. But, always the but, we can't necessarily identify all of the birds. We're not sure. And the rabbis, when they tried to distinguish, they weren't sure. So basically what happened was if the bird was traditionally eaten by Jews, it was a Jewish community, they ate that bird over the course of the centuries, it's a kosher bird. If it wasn't a Jewish community that ate that bird, it was not a kosher bird. And well, for example, one of the big questions again, turkeys were imported from America to Europe. Who knew from a turkey? Was it a big chicken? For better, for worse, thank goodness, turkeys were accepted. Although who ate them and there are Jewish communities who only eat turkey because there were no Jewish communities, unless you want to say Native Americans were lost tribes of Israel, which some people thought once upon a time. Okay. But so you have most of the domesticated fowl, most of the animals that we call chickens, and domesticated ducks and geese are considered to be kosher. The different categories of birds, I don't have off the top of my head which ones are acceptable and which ones are not. Quail are kosher. Pheasant, I think, are not, but I don't quote me on that. I've never eaten pheasant, so I would know the difference. All right. But even there can be some disputes. But basically, it has to be a bird, a fowl that was traditionally eaten by a Jewish community. There was no way to identify them clearly that were not. Now, the only other living being that is also found in the list of kosher animals are certain species of locusts. The Torah mentions certain locusts as being kosher. There were Jewish communities who claimed to have the traditions of which ones were kosher. The Yemenite Jews apparently had that tradition. Most of the rest of the Jewish world for a long time lost what that was. And so it's very hard to find a kosher locust today. So I don't think there's anybody who eats locusts today in the kosher world. Okay. So land animals, cloven hoof, chew their cud. Lives in water, fins and scales. If it's fowl, look for the kosher emblem. All right. And forget locust. Now, going back to when it comes to the animals, fish were never brought on the altar in the temple. So there was no prescribed methodology on how you had to slaughter the fish, nor was there any issue about blood of a fish. So as long as the fish is a kosher species of fish, you can do with it what you want. Okay? You bring it out of the water, chop its head off, end of story. What? Sushi. Right? That's fine. Right? That's all there is when it comes to fish. There are no rules other than you got to know it's a kosher fish. Okay. When it comes to cattle, there are several important issues. First of all, cattle must be slaughtered in a prescribed manner. They are slaughtered by a very quick cut across the neck, right, that severs the carotid artery and the windpipe. It must be done in a smooth back and forth motion. If you puncture it, if you pull on it, if there's a nick in the knife so that it tears, it's not kosher. So first and foremost, it has to be slaughtered in that manner. One of the problems that we are coming across in the modern world and becomes an issue, it's become an issue, especially in Europe, and sometimes it's brought up in North America, the issue of stunning. Most non-kosher slaughter, the animal is stunned in some way. They may use a electronic stunning, or today they shoot a bolt into the brain. That's essentially killing it. that is, at least as of now, no kosher authorities permit that kind of activity on kosher animals. And our Muslim brethren have the same restriction. Yes,
If meat is halal, is that also considered kosher?
no,
No.
no. If meat is kosher, a Muslim who eats only halal can eat it, because we share the same restriction on the means of slaughter. But after that, we differ on how the meat has to be handled. All right. So before the ritual slaughter takes place, he has to recite the proper blessing. He only has to say it once for the whole day, but he has to say that blessing. Obviously, a Muslim has no reason for saying those words. And whether or not they have restrictions on the knives and things like that, I have no idea. Okay. So in places where there is no kosher meat, no halal meat, Muslims will often take kosher meat, but we can't do the reverse. Okay. So now, all blood is supposed to be removed from the carcass as much. So what happens is, by slaughtering in this prescribed manner, hanging the animal up to let the blood come out, and then putting salt on the flesh of the animal, that draws out the blood. Any blood that remains in the body after that procedure is not regarded as being constituting the blood that is forbidden. So if you like your steak tartare, that's fine. I like my steaks just this side of mooing. Okay. But these are all examples of meat that has been salted. If a person, today, you have to remember, we live in a very different world from when a lot of these rules were originally created. You don't go to a farm, pick out a cow, slaughter the cow, and take it home for dinner, right? Basically, what you do is you go to either a grocery store that has kosher meats or a butcher that has kosher meats. And when you go to the butcher, everything has been taken care of. The meat has been salted, rinsed off, the salt's been rinsed off, etc. You can't find unsalted meat today. However, in theory, if you put it over a grill without having salted it first, you could consume it. Right? But you're not going to find it, so don't worry about it. If you have a health issue, then you talk to your rabbi in restrictions and things there. All right. Now, to make matters a little more complicated, in a couple of weeks, we're going to read the story of Jacob wrestling with an angel. And at the end of that wrestling match, the angel does something to the hip of Jacob, dislocates his thigh, something along those lines. And it says, from then on, the Bnei Yaakov, Bnei Yisrael, did not consume the Gid Hanasheh. In English, the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve is a large nerve that goes in the hind quarter. People have sciatic nerves too. It runs through a large part of the back end of animals. In theory, you can cut that out of the meat and then consume the meat. However, the economics of it in the modern era, at least in North America, are such that it is too time-consuming and expensive to what is called trevoring, to trevor the meat, to remove the sciatic nerves. Furthermore, it ruins some of the most important expensive cuts of meat. Right? If you go in Israel and you want a T-bone steak, you don't really get a whole T-bone steak. You get a half a T-bone steak because they do have meat that's been trevored. But you have to cut the T-bone in half in order to do that. So the economics of it are such that it just does not pay to try and process for kosher the hindquarters of animals. So the only cuts of kosher meat that you are going to get, whether it be lamb or beef are going to be the front quarters. We do not consume, in theory, we could, but in practice, it's just not conducive because of the economic costs. And I'll talk about costs because that's unfortunately a factor that figures into all of this as well. Now, when it comes to fowl, the birds have to be slaughtered in a similar manner, cut across the neck. And again, salted, blood drained out, some fats and things, and there are fats on the cow too that have to be removed that we don't consume. And then the fowl are eaten. It was asked earlier about milk. As I said, it says in the Torah 3 times, Lo tavashel gedi b'chalev imo, that famous passage. The joke goes that God says to Moshe, Lo, do not cook a kid in his mother's milk. So Moses says, oh, that means we can't eat it together with milk. God says, don't cook it in his mother's milk. Oh, that means we can't have any benefit from it. God says, don't kick a kid in his mother's milk. Moses says, so we can't even sell it to the Gentiles. God says, do what you want already. All right. So we know there was a community, the Talmud records that there was a community during the early Talmudic era that consumed dairy with fowl, right? Because chickens don't have milk. You can't have a violation, lo tavashel gedi b'chalev imo, if you're talking about chickens. So we do know that there was a Jewish community, it's recorded in the Talmud, that did consume it together, but it became the accepted standard practice not to. That we treat chicken as we do beef. We put them in the same category. People who are vegetarians don't generally eat chickens or beef. Okay? It's easy to to think of the two, at least in my mind, we Jews anyway, we think of chicken and meat together, beef together. So there are certain leniencies that come about as a result of that distinction, and that we'll talk about next week. So today, again, when it comes to fowl, you're not going to have to worry about soaking and salting them because it's all done in advance. There are some communities where they ship kosher meat to it that there's not yet been salted and rinsed and everything. They have to get there within 3 days in order to maintain its kosher status. And it creates issues that come about. Today, almost all of this, there's very few places outside of your major metropolitan areas that don't have the meats already packaged. So if you have a source of kosher meat, some of the major grocery stores carry some of the products. They're always in a sealed box or a sealed packaging to ensure that they are kosher and not come in contact with anything that's not kosher. Now, again, today, in some ways, it's much easier today. But in not so long ago, lard, pig's fat, was a common oil, I don't know what you call it, that was used in cooking, right? In baking. So that why, you go to a grocery store and you wanted to buy a cookie at a grocery store, any national brand of cookie, well, you didn't know if they used lard in it. You wouldn't necessarily know if they ever used dairy products in it. Did they use margarine or they use butter? So since we're not allowed to consume meat and milk together, and we're supposed to wait a period of time, we'll come back to that in a moment, you have to know whether or not that item, that processed item, has been processed with not kosher elements. Right? For example, baked beans, a can of baked beans, nice cheap meal. But frequently they are made with pork. Right? Heinz, which makes up pork and beans, also for ages made a kosher pure beans, baked beans, that were labeled and marked and certified as being kosher, Heinz kosher baked beans. That's why I grew up in the States, all right? And all right, how do I know that this can of baked beans is kosher? Well, it says on the label, there's a symbol, and I'll send out some examples of it for next week, a symbol, a kosher symbol saying that this item has been certified as being kosher by some certifying group, rabbi or a group of rabbis who certify things are kosher. The problem, because we cannot necessarily know what goes on with something that is processed. If it's raw vegetables, fine. Once they start to cook them, are they cooked in pots that are cooked with other items? Even if they're not cooked together. You know, the small scale manufacturer may only have an X amount of pots, and they make their pork and beans in this pot, and then they clean the pot out, and then they make vegetarian beans in it. They'll tell you it's pure vegetarian. Yeah, but the pork that was already in it makes it non-kosher. Again, that's more in details on that next week. There are those who insist that milk must be certified as kosher. That goes back to the Talmud's discussion. And we know that there are other animals besides dairy cattle that produce milk. And the fear was cross-contamination or intentional contamination of cow's milk with other milk from a mare or from a camel, pig. All these had dairy that was used. So in the 1930s in North America, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was asked the question, can we rely upon the government's supervision of milk to say that that milk is only 100% cow's milk, and therefore a Jew can consume it without worrying? And he wrote a responsum in which he basically said, ideally, you should use what we call Chalav Yisrael, Jewish milk, for lack of a better translation. But if you don't have it available, you're certainly allowed to use that milk. So milk, in general, milk can be any milk as long as it's, government supervised milk. Because then that they're not going to start playing games with the government by mixing other kinds of milk in cow's milk or goat's milk for that matter. But when it comes to cheese, cheese has to be produced using rennet. Rennet is an enzyme that it comes from the stomach lining of a calf. That creates all kinds of kashrut issues. Kosher cheese is today is only using rennet that comes from either from fish or from just chemical created rennet. And margarine and all these things, since they're processed and various things are involved in the process, including the possibility that real milk is used in it, you have to know. And so therefore, all of these items, cheese and dairy products, most people assume require some kind of supervision to make sure that they are kosher. And just to finish with this, of course, all of this costs money. Now, a manufacturer will pay a organization to come in, inspect their product in order to ensure that it is kosher and that it will meet the kosher consumer's needs. They pay a fee for that. Then some kind of copyrighted emblem, it can be placed on that item, assuring that it is kosher. One of the biggest ones in North America is what they call the OU. Really should be UO, but it's an U inside of an O. Union Orthodox congregations. And when you go and buy some item, if it has a UO on it, or the OU on it, that will tell you that it's kosher. They might list it as being dairy or non-dairy or parv. Parv means neutral, neither dairy nor meat. Here locally, we have CORE, Congress of Orthodox Rabbis. It's COR in a circle or it's not a circle, it's a oval, thank you. Get older and you lose, some of these things there. Again, it means some authorities have checked out, inspected what's going on, and can assure you that it is all kosher. And they inspect from time to time. They have to be able to come in, even unannounced, to examine everything that's there in the plant that's producing it to ensure that it is kosher. Similarly, when animals are slaughtered, there's usually slaughtered under the supervision of some organization that serves as the giving the official seal of approval to making sure that that is all done, that is kosher. Because not only do you have to slaughter it properly, and if anything in the slaughter goes wrong, if there's any indication that there was any disease in the animal, and these are diseases that the Talmud describes, has nothing to do with the health administration, whatever it may be in the country you're in. If an animal has a puncture in its lung, it's not kosher. If it has a needle sticking through its stomach, coming out one end to the other, it's not regarded as kosher. There are other kinds of things that invalidate an animal for being kosher. And so the meat, the lungs, et cetera, all internal organs are all checked to make sure they meet these kosher standards. So that's part of the role of what we call a mashgiach, a supervisor. Hashgacha is the supervision of the product, and the various organizations that give hashgacha. And so you got to pay salaries, you got to salt the meat. If you're dealing with chickens, the plucking of chickens have to be done with cold water, because you can't salt the chicken until the feathers have been removed. And if you use hot water, you may reach the temperature of cooking, in which case it's not been salted yet. So the feathers have to be removed as was using cold water, not hot water, or at least tepid water. Right? All these add to the expense. And that's why kosher products are going to cost more than not meats and specialty items. If you go and pick up a can of Heinz baked beans in the local grocery store, they're not, assuming it's manufactured here, not special imported for the kosher market, it's going to cost the same as any other can of vegetarian beans. Because the markup is the cost is so little, and they feel they get benefit from having the extra kosher market. Plus, there are lots of people out there, non-Jews, who, fortunately for us, they like the idea of knowing that something's kosher. They think it's better. And as long as they think it's better, they're willing to buy it. So therefore, the kosher consumer is not just those Jews who keep kosher, but those non-Jews who think there's something better about having kosher products. And so the manufacturers are happy to get those extra customers by doing this. Because every once in a while you find these anti-Semitic blurbs saying the Jews charge a tax on food. And everybody has to pay this tax on this food. And, right? And therefore it costs the non-Jewish consumer money, and that money goes to the rabbis, to the Jews. Nobody forces a manufacturer to put this kosher emblem on their product. No one forces them to pay for it. If they want it, they pay for it. And the cost that to them, in most cases, we're talking about large manufacturers, is so minute, it doesn't touch the bottom line at all. You know, a half a penny for 1,000 cans of Heinz baked beans, maybe, you know, some ridiculously low figure like that. But you will hear that. That's one of the anti-Semitic diatribes that are out there in the world that we, all right? It used to be that the Jewish community raised funds for the Jewish community by taxing kosher foods, and those funds are used by the Jewish community. That doesn't exist anymore for the most part. There are fights over kashrut, and we'll talk about that some next week. Okay, any questions about what we covered today? Those are all basic concepts that you really have to know. Okay. All right, so I'll see everybody next week, God willing. All right.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
You're welcome. All right, good night, everybody.